back to today's budget, and the biggest winner, education.
Fully subsidized education training for the poor is the government's flagship higher education intervention. Over the medium term, government will spend 111.2 billion rand to ensure that 2.8 million deserving students from poor and working class backgrounds obtain their qualifications.
Higher Education and Training Minister Naledi Pandor was very happy with her allocations. She believes this shows a real commitment to free education.
I think this honours the promise that the government has made that it would phase in full cost higher education for poor and working class families. And this is very, very good for the country because it means we begin to increase the high-level skills in South Africa. But I hope that the students will work hard to ensure that they pass. We do have conditions attached to the bursary which require you to really get down and do the work that must be done. But it's great that we're supporting young people in this way in South Africa.
Ahmed Bawa from University South Africa joins us on Skype in Johannesburg. And at our Pretoria studios, we have former student representative, council leader Katlego Makgobole. Thank you very much for joining us. Ahmed Bawa, let me start off with you. With over 100 billion heading in education's direction, it can only be a good start, right?
Yeah, good evening, Jane, and thank you for having me again.
Thank you.
I think that it's a consolidation of the decision that was made last year to roll out a bursary program. And I think that clearly it's very important that this is now built into the medium-term budget, and that's extremely important because it means that there's some level of sustainability, if you like, in the new system. The other important point is that there's some indication in the budget, and we don't know the numbers yet, but some sort of indication in Minister Mboweni's speech about investment in student accommodation, and of course that was one of the burning issues this year. So that's also good news. What it leaves us with is the need for us to have a national conversation about how to support students that fall outside of the bursary program. So students who are in what we would refer to, generally speaking, now as the missing middle, if you like. Students whose families earn above 350,000 rand and below, say, 600 or 700,000. That's still an open question, and it's a discussion. It's a national discussion that we need to have.
Katlego Makgobole, what do you make of this massive amount of cash, this cash injection? How's it going to change what we're seeing at the moment on campuses as well?
Well, I think one can start by appreciating efforts made by the President and his cabinet in terms of ensuring that there is early childhood development and employment is created for the future, so that when we graduate, we are able to find work and develop the livelihood of our families at home. My personal view is that I think this 111.2 billion is inadequate considering issues of historic debts, accommodation in our institutions of higher learning, particularly institutions that have been historically disadvantaged. I think by now you know that in TUT we've got a very huge crisis of accommodation. And this money, I think, is not going to be adequate because there are a lot of issues that must be covered with this money, and this money is not actually adequate. Another thing that I would like to add is that the minister spoke about a point that we should ensure that our plan corresponds with our budget. But the government has introduced or approved a policy on free education. But when students come to register and apply for this bursary scheme, which is called NSFAS, they are told that there is not enough money. So we are expecting the Department of Higher Education to actually look into the issue of this gap between the plan and the budget that we have, so that we don't have problems of students that roam around our campuses without funding. Itself has got a negative impact on the academic performance of our students.
I mean, that's an important point, isn't it? I mean, how do you think this will placate the students if those issues are still out there, Ahmed?
No, I think that those are all very valid points. Student debt, of course, is a very real issue. I mean, there was some progress made over the last week or so with the minister's statement about continuing students who can graduate in 2019, and that's an important development, I think. But clearly, there's still very big issues. I mean, I think that in the context that the minister has to work with a very constrained fiscus at the moment, we should be quite pleased with the commitment to the continuation of the DHET bursary program and the potential investment in student accommodation. Those are two very important issues.
I mean, you've got to wonder, with so many more students working their way through the system, when this will ever end, the need for this amount of cash. Yes,
I think that we have to think of this money not so much as an expenditure, but as an investment. Because actually, the unemployment rate of graduates in South Africa is about 6%, which is much lower than the national unemployment rate. And the economy appears to be still in a position to absorb graduates. So I think we have to see this as an investment rather than in the future, rather than as an expenditure item.
Katlego, you touched on it briefly, but when do you think we'll see a return on this investment?
Come again?
When do you think we'll see a return on this investment, when the students can start putting back and be active partners in business?
Yes, I think the only time we'll get a return for this kind of investment is when the Department of Higher Education accepts that there are problems in institutions of higher learning and they start to request for more funding from our National Treasury and our government, precisely because we cannot only concentrate on a good academic performance or the line functions of universities. We must also consider the support functions, which are transport, historic debts, and your accommodation. With all these contributing factors to the academic performance of our students, they are very much important, and I don't think there is a student who can be able to excel academically when that student does not have food or when that student does not know where to sleep after attending classes. So I think the only time we can expect a good return is when all these issues that I just mentioned, including the issue of historic debts, because currently when we are speaking, we've got students who are not covered by this bursary scheme precisely because they've been in the university for long or they've not performed well academically previously. So they are unable to register now because they are owing high amounts of money. And that on itself is a problem again, because these students end up going home hopeless and not being able to register. And maybe some of these solutions of economic stagnation are stuck in the mind of a child that cannot be able to register because of a lack of funding. So we are saying we must concentrate on these issues.
Makgobole, thank you very much, and Ahmed Bawa. Now, those in business and the finance sector say they feel encouraged by this year's budget speech, although they'd like to see a few more tweaks. Most are applauding Tito Mboweni for a more inclusive budget. Pelade Satusa reports.
Honourable members.
Relief all round as efforts to truly trim the fat and rein in SOE lending are announced by Minister of Finance, Tito Mboweni.
We must commend the Minister of Finance because this ballooning debt is unsustainable. If you want this money, manage the money better, manage the organization better, and ensure that we won't be in this trap again.
And these are the kind of expenditure cuts that have not been announced previously, and they're in difficult areas, like the public sector wage bill. I mean, in the end, this is austerity, and austerity is something that I think investors and rating agencies want to see.
Some feel more could have been done to cut back on expenditure.
The wage bill cutting, I think, is important, but the way you do it is important. You don't want to lose all your experienced people in one go. Well, we're still on a deficit, so 248 billion of a deficit means he didn't cut enough, but I don't know if he had the freedom to cut more than that.
And there's still an economic uphill battle ahead.
There are some key policy issues that really need to be bottomed out. The issues around land and property rights, the energy sector, the health policy, and those need to be properly articulated and they need to be implemented.
I think what was lacking was specific details of growth-enhancing reforms. This economy simply needs to grow faster.
Economic experts say dealing with corruption decisively and with some speed is one sure way of boosting confidence. Piladi Sutusa, Parliament.
Opposition parties have labelled it a lipstick budget, one that merely glosses over the real issues. Here's some of the reactions.
Firstly, South Africa faces a very difficult stage now. What has become very clear is that instead of taking bold and decisive action on Eskom, we've allocated more bailouts. Even though you can talk about education, the fact of the matter is that he's taken money away from provinces whose core competence is to deliver education. This was a lipstick budget. It made it look pretty on the outside, but frankly, it's dealt with nothing. We need a plan that will deliver jobs, and ultimately, I don't want us to debate whether we should hold on to SOEs or not. We should be selling them.
No clear plans on job creation, no clear plans on what's going to happen to the land expropriation. To want to sell an idea that we can sell the state-owned enterprises, we'll never agree to that. We need those assets. Those are strategic assets. Some of them, their purpose of existence is not to make profit. It's to ensure that our people benefit from those state-owned enterprises.
Overall, we are in trouble. There's no money. Government debt has gotten out of hand. That much is clear, because even if you were to look at the budget deficit, including your debt to GDP ratio, all of that has increased. But what I didn't hear from the minister, is how the ANC intends to pay back the money which was channeled via Bosasa and that they used for their rallies, because they need to start from there, including the Hitachi money that was channeled to the... If they are serious about fighting corruption and getting people to pay back the money that they stole from the state, they must start with the ANC.
We borrow 1.2 billion a day, but the interest alone is 1 billion. We welcome the wage bill of government that is going to be cut to 27 billion annually, but we also say that they should have looked at the senior management also of state departments to not allow any further increases, because, for instance, a municipal manager gets in certain places more than the president.
Well, as you know, I was involved in the Eskom inquiry, and it is absolutely disgraceful that 69 billion rand is given to Eskom. Whilst it is understandable under the new board, the previous state capture and corruption, which we exposed, has not yet been dealt with. We need to recover that money that was stolen, and then the taxpayer would not have to foot the bill to keep the lights on. I'm not so sure whether this will be successful given the trade unions' opposition, but we wish them everything the best with reconfigurating Eskom.
That wraps up our show for tonight. News is next. I'll see you then.